Greetings, fellow Empyreans. I am Ashrothi, the voice of New Eden, and this is your guide to EVE Online in 2025, Missiles Edition. We are here to talk about the other major weapon system within EVE Online, missiles. The last time we talked about the tutorial for 2025, we did go over turrets, which at the time I explained was the probabilistic weapon system of EVE Online. Turrets use a random number generator in order to generate whether or not you hit or miss and how much damage you do. Missiles are different. Missiles actually are completely formulaic about how they do damage, which makes them a very interesting choice, especially for newer players and for kiters and other people that want to be extremely agile and therefore don't want to have to deal with things like transversal velocity and issues with trying to hit. But missiles have their own considerations in mind. So, without further ado, let's jump into some of the basic mechanics of missiles. Then we'll talk about the kinds of missiles and who uses missiles more than others. With turrets, we had things like tracking and optimal range and fall off and all these sorts of things. Missiles also have their own unique considerations. In order to get into missiles, though, we have to first explain a concept called signature radius. Your signature radius is your ship's effective size. One thing I like to say is that mechanically in game, your ship is just a sphere and a vector, and your signature radius is that sphere. Some things can make your signature radius bigger, some things can make your signature radius smaller, but that signature radius controls a lot. It controls how fast it takes for things to lock you. It controls how easy it is for you to hit with things like turrets. And it also affects how much damage missiles can do to you. Certain things like micro warp drives will increase your signature radius. And like I said, there are some things that can help reduce your signature radius. It also, by the way, signature radius affects how easy it is for scanners to try to scan you down with combat probes. Because, as I said, it is in essence how big you are in the simulation of the game. The bigger you are, the bigger the target you are. The easier you are to lock, the easier you are to scan down, the easier you are to hit. Where does this come in when it comes to missiles? Missiles do not have a random number generation mechanic to it. It is simply formulaic. There are two considerations when it comes to missiles: whether or not the missile can make it to the target and how much damage that missile does. So let's talk about the first piece to this. Every missile has a flight time and a speed. So let's go ahead and jump into the game. And we have our wonderful praxis here that we used last time. And if I open up the fitting and go to simulate, we can pull up some launchers. And there are a lot of different types of missile launchers. Just like other weapon systems, there are a short range weapon system and a long range weapon system for each size. But there's a lot of little considerations here and there when it comes to the nuances of missiles. So we're going to go into that in a little bit. But for now, we're just going over the basic mechanics of missiles themselves. Are we going to cover Vortrons as well, since they use similar mechanics? We may just have that be a totally separate video where we cover things like Vortron projectors, breacher pods, and drones. After editing the turret video, I kind of want to see how things go. But like I said, we're going to start by putting cruise missile launchers on this praxis here and looking at the stats. So the launcher itself has a reload time, a rate of fire, and a capacity. So the capacity controls how many missiles can be in the launcher before it has to reload. The rate of fire controls how fast you shoot and therefore do damage. And the reload time is how much time it takes when you run out of ammo or you want to switch ammo before you can fire again. Pretty simple stuff. However, the missiles themselves have a lot of the main value that is important to you. Now, turrets are kind of the same way too, where, you know, the exact damage that's done is connected to the ammo, whereas the rate of fire is on the weapon. But missiles are a little bit different because while the turret shoots a bullet that is like instantaneous, you make your shot, the turret rolls its thing, it multiplies its damage by the damage of the ammo, and that's what it projects. The missile, actually, the launcher doesn't do anything. The launcher just fires the missile, and the missile does everything else. So if we look at the turrets, we'll see that turrets have things like tracking and accuracy fall off and optimal range. So the turret itself determines how far that turret can shoot, and the ammo modifies the turret's values. If we go back to the missile launcher, we'll notice that doesn't exist here. There is no range on here at all, which means all of that information is actually in the missile itself. So if we look at a missile, we can see that this missile has an explosion velocity, an explosion radius, but those aren't, we'll get to those in a second. It has a maximum velocity of 4,700 and a maximum flight time of 14 seconds. What that means is when the launcher launches a missile, that missile propels itself to the enemy, and it does so over a period of time. So unlike turrets, where as soon as you hit F1, you do the damage, when it comes to missiles, that missile has to actually fly from your ship to the enemy ship, which also means that the missiles can, for instance, like if you have smart bombs, there's actually a technique called firewalling where you attempt to destroy the missiles while they are in flight. This is not a very common thing anymore, but it is technically possible, and it really drives home the idea that these missiles are independent entities that travel to your enemy target. And this is important because the missile continues to fly towards the opponent during the entire flight time. So if we looked at this, we could take the maximum velocity and multiply it by the maximum flight time, and we will get how far this missile system can go. If we open up our calculator, we can go 4.7 kilometers times 14. So it's going to go 65.8 kilometers total over the course of that 15 seconds or 14 seconds. And if we hover over this, we'll see that it has a maximum flight range of 66 kilometers. So it's actually rounding up in here. Now, this is actually not 100% true, or at least not always with every missile system. And so this is kind of the first confusing thing when it comes to missiles. Now, I assure you, but as we're getting into this kind of complexity, that the reason why people like missile systems is because of the fact that they're a lot easier to fly with, right? You don't have to worry about tracking. You don't have to worry about range as much. You just basically, you have your maximum range and that's it. So compared to turrets, missile systems are a lot easier to figure out what's going on. And because they're formulaic, missiles, as long as they get to their target, they will always do some amount of damage. So they're often pretty decent at applying damage to things that are smaller than them compared to turrets, which will just miss. And if you miss, you do 0 damage, right? As long as that missile hits, you're going to at least scratch their paint. But here we see that this is a round number of flight time. But the problem is that Eve functions in a 1 second tick. So things can't happen mid-tick. And there are skills that will increase the amount of flight time that a missile will have. And so you can have missiles that do not go a full round number of seconds while it's flying. And so the question is, what happens if a missile doesn't have a round number? Let's say the missile has 14.5 seconds of flight time. What's fun about that is that means that half of the missiles that get shot are going to fly for 14 seconds, and half of the missiles that are shot are actually going to fly 15 seconds. So none of them are going to fly 14.5 seconds, because that's not a thing that exists. Half of your missiles are actually going to fly shorter than you think that it's going to be, and half of the missiles are going to fly a little bit longer than you think that they're going to be. In addition to that, it actually takes a little bit of time for the missiles to get up to speed, so you're not going to hit exactly as far out as you think that you're going to, because it requires a little bit of time for it to get up to speed. It doesn't go out the barrel directly at 4,700 meters per second. These are very edge case sorts of situations. In general, you can just hover over your missile system and it'll give you a rough idea of that missile's maximum flight range. Just realize that theoretically speaking, you can hit a little bit further out than your missile flight range if you have partial seconds. And in general, you're actually going to want to be a little bit closer than the flight time, because here's the other problem. The enemy ship is also going to be moving as your missile travels towards it. So if we open up the agency again, if we go into the help section, we can come down here to combat mechanics and click on missile range. A missile flight time, and is its flight time multiplied by its velocity. So you can see like it's burning through its flight time and going its velocity. So we can see that it travels, and then it gets to its maximum range, and then it dies, right? But because it has to travel towards the opponent, you can see that ship is actually flying away from the missile. So the missile kind of comes up behind it, and if the ship is traveling faster than the missile, then oftentimes the ship can outrun the missile. So this is the biggest consideration, where when it comes to turrets, as we mentioned, transversal velocity, the speed across your horizon, is the most important thing. When it comes to the missiles, the absolute velocity is the most important. Not only for whether or not the missile reaches your target, but also for damage application, which we'll look at in a little bit. So that is something to take into consideration. Your missile velocity, as well as the flight time, is going to affect whether or not the missile actually makes it to the target or not, because it does have to fly the distance towards the target. So a faster ship can travel away from the missile. Now, this also means, fun fact, that let's say your range is 65, like we were looking at before, right? The missile range is 65, as we already did the math, or in this case, 66. I've got targets coming at me, but they're at like 70 kilometers. They're going fast enough, I can shoot my missile. If I suspect that they're going to cross across that 66 kilometer threshold in the 14 seconds of the missile's flight time, then I can still shoot my missile. Because it's not about where they are when I launch the missile, it's about where they are when my missile makes it to them. So if somebody's beelining to me, I can actually shoot my missiles early and trust that they will get within range before the missile gets there, and then they'll smack into each other. So that's pretty cool. So it goes both ways. The enemy can theoretically make your missiles hit even though they start out at the launching of the missile further away. The other half of this equation is once the missile makes it to their target, the question is, how much damage does it do? And turrets are probabilistic, so there's a random number generation between 50% to 150% of the maximum damage and 300% for a wrecking shot, whereas missiles are completely formulaic. And that formula is based on the missile's explosion velocity and explosion radius versus the ship's velocity and ship's signature radius. So signature radius, that thing that we just talked about a little bit ago, about how big your ship is effectively in the simulation. So if you think about it, if you have like the sphere, which is the ship's signature radius, and then you apply onto it the sphere of the explosion radius, and then you shift the explosion radius off from center based on how much faster the ship is from your explosion radius. So if your explosion radius is faster than the ship's, if your explosion velocity is faster than the opponent's velocity, then you don't move the circle at all. If the ship is faster than your explosion velocity, then you shift the explosion off from center based on how much faster the opponent's ship is. And then you check to see how much of the explosion radius is still covered by the ship's signature radius. And the proportion of that sphere is how much of a proportion of your maximum damage that you do. So that's a little bit confusing, but here's the visual for it. I've explained it, so now we can look at the application video. So we have here the video on application. So we see here, there are two different situations here. This rifter is going faster than the explosion velocity, and therefore the rifter manages to kind of escape some of the explosion. Whereas this mauler is not traveling faster, or not much faster than the explosion velocity, so it doesn't really move out from the center. Already we can tell that this explosion is going to be kind of half as effective as it would have been if this rifter was not moving. However, the point is that this is how much of the explosion is covered by the signature radius, not the other way around, okay? So let's keep looking. So here we see the signature radiuses. This rifter's halfway out of the explosion, whereas this mauler is almost completely inside of the explosion. But the damage is going to be based on how much of the explosion is contained, not how much of the ship is contained. The ship can be completely in the explosion and still not do 100% of the damage. Because if you think about it, if the explosion is bigger than the signature radius of the ship, then a certain amount of the energy, the violence, the damage potential of the explosion is kind of going off elsewhere rather than completely contained on the ship itself. So neither of these are going to do full damage, but the mauler is going to take a lot more damage because more of the explosion is encompassed by the signature radius of the mauler. Does that make sense? So that's how missiles work when it comes to damage. You basically offset the signature radius based on how much faster the ship is going, and you check to see how much of the missile's explosion radius is encompassed by the signature radius to see how much of a percentage of the damage that you're doing. Which means if your explosion velocity is faster than the opponent's velocity and your explosion radius is smaller than your opponent's signature radius, then you will do 100% of the damage of that missile. Anything short of that, you will do a percentage of your missile's damage based on how much of the explosion is still contained or is still covered by the opponent's ship's signature radius. Okay, so that is how missiles work. That means that there are multiple ways of making your missiles work better. If you web your opponent, then they will be going slower, which means that you will keep them in the center of your explosion better. However, that does mean that webbing can only get you so far when it comes to increasing your damage when it comes to missiles. If you manage to slow your opponent down to the point where your explosion velocity is higher than your opponent's actual velocity, then continuing to slow them down further does you no good, because the explosion is already going faster. However, if you increase their signature radius, like if we go back to this video, even if this Mauler was going as fast as the Rifter, if it was going as fast as the Rifter, so just imagine that this Mauler is halfway out of the explosion. Because the Mauler's signature radius is so large, it still means that more of the explosion is going to be covered by the Mauler, which means target painting continues to be useful beyond just the signature even if you have a very fast ship, but a large ship for some reason, like you target paint it. So you target paint the ship, it increases its effective signature radius. So now the signature radius matches, it's exactly the same as the explosion radius, but it's going twice as fast as the explosion velocity. Well, then the ship would be moved halfway out of the thing, and so about half of the explosion would still be covered by the ship, and so you do about half damage. If you put a second target painter on that ship, and so increase the signature radius even further, even though like if they were standing perfectly still, that wouldn't change the damage at all, because it would just do 100% of the damage. It covers up 100% of the thing, blah, 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 blah. But if it's going faster, it's going to try to shift out of the center of the explosion. If its signature radius is larger than the explosion radius, then it has to shift further in order to get out of the explosion. And so continually increasing their signature radius will continue to be useful up until you get maximum 100% damage. Whereas webs will only be useful until your explosion velocity is faster than their actual velocity. So this is why, in general, webs are considered to be better for turrets, because turrets are all about trying to track against speed. Signature radius kind of applies just because bigger stuff does kind of counter against that speed. But in general, turrets care about how fast the thing is going in transversal velocity. And so webs are going to be much more useful for turrets, whereas target painters are so much more useful for missiles. Because with missiles, you're not worried about whether or not you hit. You're definitely going to hit, at least if it makes it to its range. It's about how much damage you're doing. So the bigger you can balloon their signature radius, the more of a percentage of your missiles you're going to do to that target. And what we'll see is there's a lot of these missile systems, especially the bigger ones, have large signature radiuses. So they're almost never going to do 100% of their damage. So the more you can target paint, the more damage that you're going to do. And again, their transversal velocity doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is their absolute velocity. And also, what doesn't matter is your velocity. And this is why kitey ships tend to like missiles. If you're zipping around and you're going super fast, you actually can out-track your own turrets, right? If you're zipping around them super fast, that's actually mechanically the same exact thing as them zipping around you very fast. They're still going to be crossing across your threshold, your horizon, just as quickly. Because remember, you don't actually have a direction, you just have a sphere and a vector. So as you're going around them, you're going to be causing your turrets to track less. But your missiles are going to apply just as good, regardless of how fast you are going. So kitey ships, fast ships, agile ships, ships that want to have a high traversal velocity, they tend to like to go with missiles, whereas turrets like to have very stable firing platforms. What about the target painting video? Does that show off anything that's useful to us from this? Yeah, see, we can see that the signature radius increases, which makes it easier for turrets to track, and it makes it easier for missiles to track. So you can see here that it would have done a lot less damage, but because of that target painter, it ends up doing a larger percentage of its damage available to it. This is also why, by the way, guys, people have a tendency to look at missile ships. EFT warriors have a tendency to look at missile ships and be like, look at all this damage that I can do. But you're a lot less likely to be doing your maximum damage with missiles than you are with turrets. Another thing that's worth noting when it comes to the application of missile damage versus turret damage is that turret damage, because it's probabilistic, can wreck. We talked about there's a 1% chance every time a turret fires of doing a critical hit called a wrecking shot, which does 300% damage. Missiles cannot wreck. So while turrets have a higher potential damage threshold, missiles have a much more consistent damage profile. There's another advantage to missiles, which is in the ammo themselves. We can see that, so there's these different kinds of missiles. There's auto-targeting missiles, and then there's the standard missiles. And then with T2, there's Fury and Precision. But we'll cover that in a little bit. For just standard missiles, we can see that there are 4 different standard missiles: Inferno, Mjolnir, Nova, and Scourge. And this is independent of which launcher type you use. So if we go down to rockets, which are the smallest, shortest range weapon system. Cruises are the largest, longest range weapon system. Rockets are the shortest, smallest range weapon system. They still have Inferno, Mjolnir, Nova, and Scourge, which that matches the 4 damage types in the game. We'll talk, this is something we talked about with turrets. We'll talk about it more with tank type, but you can see that there are 4 different damage types in the game. There's EM, thermal, kinetic, and explosive. And very, very nearly all damage must be one of these damage types. The only exception at this point, as of this recording, is breacher pods, which is, again, a topic for another time. But what that means is that there is a missile for every damage type. When we talked about turrets, we talked about the fact that half of the turrets, well, most of the turrets are damage locked. Hybrids only do thermal and kinetic, lasers only do EM thermal, and entropic disintegrators only do thermal and explosive, which means every single turret type does at least some kind of thermal, with the only turret type that can choose its own damage type being projectiles. So unlike turrets, missiles can choose their damage type. Inferno does 100% thermal damage. Mjolnir does 100% EM damage. Nova does 100% explosive damage, and Scourge does 100% kinetic damage. For ease of understanding, as a quick reference, if the names are too confusing for you, which, by the way, so Inferno, thermal, Inferno, fire, Mjolnir. Mjolnir's might be the more confusing one. Mjolnir is the hammer of Thor, which is the god of thunder and lightning. So Mjolnir is EM. A Nova is an explosion, and so it's explosive. And Scourge is kind of the odd one out. It's kinetic damage. Scourge does mean to strike. That's a good point. So it's like hitting it, right? But we can see here in this missile, it's a lot easier to tell. We can see that this is a Mjolnir, and if you can look closely here, it's actually got a blue little band here. Just like this rocket, this Mjolnir rocket has a blue tip on this weapon. So you can look at the missile's color in order to tell what kind of damage it does. Thermal is red. Let's look at these because it's easier. Hold on. Inferno has a red band. Mjolnir has a blue band. Nova has a yellow band, and Scourge has a green band. That's another quick way to tell. And as we demonstrated last time, if you are undocked and right-click on your weapon system, it will tell you with each of your ammo types what damage they do. So that's the other way to tell. So missiles can be choose your own damage type. Now there is a caveat to that, which we will talk about when we talk about who uses missile systems. But in general, missiles are about consistent damage. They're really good at applying to things below them, like smaller things, whereas a turret would miss. And they're really good at selecting their own damage type. This is why a lot of missile systems, like a lot of people, if you get into missions or other PvE, missiles end up being so popular because you don't have to worry about transversal. You don't have to worry about having something that you can't do any damage to at all. And you can swap your damage type to be whatever the damage type you need to do for the rats that you're fighting. Missiles end up being this a really good missile weapon system, especially for players that don't want to consider a lot of the stuff that projectiles need for consideration. However, that flight time does mean that there's a delay between when you fire and when the missiles hit. So for things like PvP, a lot of times people prefer projectiles because that way they can hit F1 and do their damage instantly, and they don't have to worry about that flight time. Now, actually, technically speaking, there are some ships, there are some comps that really like missiles, because even though there is a flight time, if you all fire at the same time, they still all do damage at the same time, as long as you all have the same skills. That is actually one of the interesting things. If you've got a fleet with people with different skill levels, then the missiles will actually hit at different times, which you don't necessarily want, but Ravens can still be very popular and still have a high alpha strike, even though it takes a little while for the missiles to get there. Once they do, they all hit with one big hit. With all that said, let's go ahead and start looking at some of the other missile systems, and we'll look at some of the other quirks about missiles themselves. In order to do that, I want to first pull up the Metamorphosis. The Metamorphosis is basically the frigate of the Praxis, and it can use any weapon system. So we can go here and we can look at the small missile systems, which are rockets and light missiles. So we can see a rocket launcher and a light missile launcher. Never mind, the Metamorphosis only has one free slot, or missile slot. So we're going to go with the Synesis instead. Oh, also, if you notice, there's a lot fewer types of launchers than there are turrets. You know, with turrets at any given size, there's 2 to 3 types based on how heavy the gun is, and that affects its tracking versus its damage versus its range. Given the fact that range and application are all exclusively about the missile that you use, there's only one launcher type per weapon category. There's meta, there's tech 2, there's tech 1, there's all the different like power scale of that type, but it's not like turrets where there's like electron blasters and neutron blasters and protons, right? Hold on. I'm having a moment. Give me a second. Ion. I knew that proton wasn't correct. Yeah, we're Ghostbusters here, boys. Yeah, drones are another good weapon system. So like drones and missiles are considered to be the secondary weapon systems. But with here, we've got the light missile launcher and we've got rocket launchers. The light missile launcher, we'll go with Scourge for both. So this one, the light missile, has a 19-kilometer flight time. Now remember, all these stats are going to be affected by ship skills or ship capabilities or your personal skills. The character that I am using here has basically no skills at all. I have literally 0 missile skills. 0 missile skills on this character. So no missile skills are affecting my performance, but there are skills that'll affect performance. We'll talk about that later. And of course, the Synesis does have damage bonuses, but no projection or anything like that. So everything's kind of on the same even keel here. So we can see that here, the light missile launcher does 104 damage every 12 seconds for a total of 8.1 DPS and has a maximum flight time of 19 kilometers. Whereas the rockets does 41 damage every 4 seconds for a total of 10 DPS. But it only has a maximum flight range of 4.5 kilometers. So the rockets do less damage and fly a shorter distance, but they fire significantly faster. So they do a lot more damage per second. They have about a 30%, 20 to 30% higher DPS, but about a third, almost a fourth of the maximum flight range. So very short range, very high damage. If we want to compare that to a small well, we're going to go with the small blaster, the highest damage dealing turret in the game, the neutron blaster. If we put antimatter in here, which is the short range ammo, it has a optimal range of 750 with a fall off of 3,200, but it does 18 DPS. So it's got an even shorter range, and also in this much the same way, it has an incredibly fast cycle time, a 3-second rate of fire. And I think that that is actually being affected by, yeah, I do have skills in that. So that is being affected. So let's go ahead and also, just to give this a more fair option, let's go ahead and look at pulse lasers, maybe? I think pulse lasers will probably be a good one. Gatling pulse laser. Yeah, perfect. So Gatling pulse laser with standard ammo has an optimal of 5k and a fall off of 6k. So it's about the same range as the rockets, a little bit further, but it also does lower damage per second. It has 8.9 instead of 10.3. In fact, it's closer to the light missile launcher. But remember, also, this can crit. So this could theoretically do more damage than it's suggesting it is. And I could get different ammo. Like I could go multi-frequency, and now I've got a little bit less range, but a little bit more damage. Damage-wise, they're kind of comparable, although obviously how that damage applies is going to be where a lot of this goes. So the rocket launcher is going to be this short range, fast cycle time. It's basically the blaster of the missiles, whereas light missiles are going to be a much further range, 19 kilometers. 19 kilometers is really, really good. And this is the other thing that's true about missile systems, is that in general, the long-range missile systems are some of the best long-range weapon systems in the game. You know, we talked about before how far hybrids shoot or rails shoot. Let's look at the comparison there. Rails, the longest range weapon system in the game. So we're going to grab 150 millimeter railgun 2. Iron goes out to 23. So theoretically speaking, this railgun goes further than light missiles. But look, it's only going to do 6.4 DPS at that range. If we've got a much more comparable, like, so this is 14 optimal, 20 fall off, and it is 10.2 DPS. So this is going to be doing a little bit higher damage at the same range as the light missiles. But again, remember, this railgun can miss. Railguns in particular have really bad tracking. So if you're trying to project that far distance, if you're trying to get to that 19-20 kilometer range, that light missile is going to consistently hit out that range pretty good. That's comparable to the furthest weapon system as far as turrets go. And we're going to see that pattern kind of play out as we go. And of course, this is all just basic ammo, right? If I put in advanced ammo, the Tech 2 ammo, now this is kind of going to be interesting. Each missile system has their own Tech 2 ammo. So Fury for rockets, or sorry, light missile, we can see here, Tech 2 have a shorter flight time than everything else and no difference in its speed. So if I just take just a standard Scourge light missile, put it in, it goes 19. If I put in Fury, it goes 14. And if I go with Precision, it's going to go 9. The standard Tech 1 is going to be the furthest flying one. And then, of course, Navy ends up flying, you know, the same as normal Tech 1. In this, like with turrets, Tech 2 ammo tends to make the tracking of the ship, of the turret harder, you know, worse. So it's application. In this case, we can see that Tech 2 is reducing my flight time by quite a bit. But also, look at this. The Fury is 69 meters for the explosion velocity, which is over 50% more than the explosion radius of the other weapon systems. But we can also see that it does a lot more damage. This is kind of weird, right? Because it has a harder time applying that damage, but it does more damage. So even though it's going to be doing a smaller percentage of it, a smaller percentage of a larger number. So in the end, the Fury may be able to keep up. But this is where those details about how application work become so important. Because if you're firing at a target that's 69 meters big, then you're going to be applying all of this damage, whereas this is going to be doing 83 damage, this is going to be doing 116 damage. So if you have target painters on an enemy ship, and so you're making the signature radius bigger, you're going to get more of that higher potential damage. Whereas those other missiles, the non-Tech 2 missiles, they apply a little bit better and they shoot a little bit better. Well, they apply a lot better, but they shoot quite a bit further. But they cap out in their damage lower than the Fury. And then Precision has a much smaller explosion radius. Look at that, 25 meters. Way smaller than even the light missile, the standard light missiles. So what this means is that even if something has a small signature radius, you're still going to be able to apply a lot more of your damage. It does the same amount of damage as the light missile. So if the target is 40 meters or bigger, then firing a precision missile at them and firing a standard missile at them, they're going to do the exact same amount of damage. But if the thing is smaller than 40, then you're going to get more damage out of the precision missiles than out of the standard missiles. Now, these are the long-range weapon systems. So in much the same way with the Tech 2, we had the high damage, low application ammo, and we had the high application, low range, long-range ammo. So this is kind of comparable to that. This long-range weapon system has a thing that cuts its range, but it makes it so that it applies significantly better. Let's look at rockets. So with rockets, we can see the Tech 1. Once again, you have maximum velocity. With the light missiles, it was flight time, right? So we have velocity, which affects distance, as well as the application. So we can see here that our Tech 2 is Rage and Javelin, with our standard Tech 1 and Faction. So the maximum velocity, we can see that the Scourge is the furthest shooting one. So now the Tech 2 actually increases its range. Sorry, yeah, the Tech 2 Javelin, my bad, Javelin. Javelin shoots the furthest and has the same explosion radius, so same application, same explosion radius and explosion velocity as the Tech 1, but lower damage. So with the Tech 2, you've got one that actually does less damage but shoots further, and you have this one that does a lot more damage but goes less far and has a significantly larger, over 50% larger explosion radius and a slower explosion velocity, which, remember, you want a high explosion velocity, low explosion radius. So the Rage rockets are going to be much worse with application, but again, have a higher end for their damage. Whereas with the rest of the missile systems, they have the same application as the Javelin. So you can shoot further and do less damage. You can do the normal amount, or you can have worse application, but higher maximum potential. And this doesn't miss. So like if you're target painting them or webbing them, that's just going to help you get more of your potential, which, remember, like these speeds, 150 meters per second is not that fast. It's not hard to get something that's going faster than this. However, if you're firing at like a cruiser, then there is a pretty good chance that you can get them to be going slower than your rockets. But also, well, let's look at this Synesis. This is a destroyer, and it has a signature radius of 65. So this is much bigger than any of these. So even though the Synesis is going to go faster than the explosion velocity, as we pointed out, like it's going to shift it out of the center, but you're still going to have to shift it quite a bit off the center before that 60-kilometer radius starts to get out from underneath that 20-kilometer radius. So rockets are probably going to apply pretty good to this Synesis, assuming that you can hit them. Whereas these light missiles have a much bigger explosion radius, up to 69 meters. So compare that to this signature radius. So already that rocket, the Fury rocket, requires a target painter to be able to do maximum damage to a Synesis, even if it's staying totally still. So again, because rockets, especially Fury, are not designed to do their maximum damage all the time. They're designed to do a portion of their damage. But what that means is that the larger you can bloom their signature and the slower you can make them, the more of your potential damage that you're actually going to be able to do. That is rockets and light missiles, or that is the small weapon systems. Now, when we move up to mediums, we run into something a little bit interesting. I told you that there's a short-range weapon system and there's a long-range weapon system for each type of missile systems, and there's only one launcher for each. That isn't true. I lied. That is true for small weapons, but every other size category of missiles will have a third type of launcher. So let's go ahead and pull up the Gnosis. The Gnosis is the battlecruiser version of the SOCT ships. So it's the same as the Praxis, the same as the Synesis. It has bonuses for all weapon systems. It's exactly like same methodology. In fact, the Gnosis was the first one of them all, by the way. And we can go to missile launchers, and we can go to heavy launchers and heavy assault launchers. I know it's a little confusing, but just bear with me. Heavy missile launchers are going to be the long-range weapon system, and heavy assault missile launchers are going to be the short-range missile launchers. But then we actually run into a third type of medium weapon system, which is the rapid light missile launcher. And this is where things start to get really interesting. We will start with the heavy missile launcher. The heavy missile launcher uses heavy missiles, and we can see that it will do 186 kinetic damage every 12 seconds for a total of 15.5 DPS with a maximum flight time of 28 kilometers. So it is shooting further. And then the heavy assaults are going to do 125 damage every 6 seconds, so faster, which makes it do 19.5 DPS, so more. But it has a maximum flight time range of 9 kilometers. Again, so short range. It's not as short as rockets are, because bigger weapon systems go further, but that is pretty significantly short range. And then if we look at the actual missiles themselves, it kind of paints the same, we can start to see sort of the same picture play out, where here's the heavy assault missiles and here's the heavy missiles. And we can go explosion velocity, explosion radius, maximum flight time, kinetic damage. So we can see that the explosion radius of we have Fury for the heavy missiles and Rage for the heavy assault missiles. That's the same nomenclature, right? Yeah, Rage, Javelin, Javelin. Okay, so the naming of the Tech 2 missiles are the same. That's nice. So the short range has Rage and Javelin. The long range has Fury and Precision. So the Precision is going to give you a better explosion velocity or explosion radius, and the Fury is going to give you like the best damage. So a lot of the same patterns are showing up here. So we're not going to go over all of the details like we did before, but you can kind of see how it plays out. The thing here is, though, that there is a third medium weapon system, which is the rapid light missile launcher. So this is one of the things that's really interesting about how missiles work and why missiles are so much better at applying down against lower tier targets. Each size category besides small, when it comes to weapon system or missiles, has a rapid version of the size category smaller. So medium weapon systems have a rapid light missile. The large weapon system has a rapid heavy missile. For all but the capital one, what it does is it fires the long range version of the size category down, but it fires it significantly faster. If we go to light missile launchers, so we have a light missile launcher and we have a rapid light missile launcher, right? They both fire the same missile. They fire light missiles, which means you have the same flight time, you have the same explosion velocity, the same damage, but the difference here is the reload time, the rate of fire, and the capacity. You can see here that the light missile launcher has over twice the capacity, so has twice as many missiles in a single clip, and has a reload time of 10 seconds versus the rapid light missile launcher of 35 seconds. But the difference is that the rapid light missile launcher fires twice as fast as the light missile launcher. So you're shooting the same missile, but you're doing it twice as fast, which means you're doing twice as much damage. And the key here is that, remember, the missile itself determines how well it applies. So you're basically firing a frigate weapon, but you're doing cruiser level DPS with frigate tier application. That's what's critical here. So if you're wanting to kill a frigate, this thing is going to pump out damage, and it's actually going to apply because it's firing frigate-sized missiles at that target. So it's going to have frigate quality application, which is good. The key here is, though, that rapid light missile launcher is going to, shitty reload time. The whole point of this is that rapids are about burst damage. This is why rapid lights or rapid missiles are really, really good in PvP and not very great in PvE. People will try it in PvE, they'll throw them into PvE, they'll see the numbers, it feels good, and then they have to sit there for that 35-second reload time, and they're like, So we can see here, we grab a light missile, we put it into both of these. We can see that this light missile launcher, which is again the frigate-sized weapon system, this isn't exactly fair because one is bonus and the other isn't, but still. So this light missile system is doing 6.5, but we remember from before it was like 8.1 if we remember correctly on the Synesis, so we'll just stick with that. 8.1 DPS, and we can fire, we have a maximum number of, I can't tell how many are loaded into the missile launcher from here, doesn't matter, but it has the 19-kilometer flight time, same flight time, but oh no, this doesn't, okay, so this is going to be comparable because this also doesn't have rapid light bonuses, but so this thing is going to do 13.3 DPS versus this thing's 6.5 DPS. That's obviously better, but if the fight lasts longer than your clip, which is about 30 seconds worth of firing, then you're going to go into reload and it's going to lower your overall DPS. So if we look here, I think if we do this 6.5 DPS with that weapon system, 13 point, oh no, they don't do it right because this doesn't factor in reload time apparently. This is why you see things like rapid light caracals, right? And this is also like, we'll talk about this when we get to tanks, but shield and missiles have a tendency to kind of go hand in hand, and they both become very, very, very bursty in how they operate. Because with shields, you have a tendency to oversize them, or you go with ancillary shield boosters that are oversized. So you get these big bursts of hit points, and you have rapid lights. So you've got these big, this really bursty damage. But if the fight lasts more than 30 seconds, you're done. Does it show there? Oh yeah, you're right. So it's 10.4 DPS with reload time versus 6.4 DPS with reload time for the light missile launcher. But if you look here, like if we look at the heavy missiles, which are again the lower damage of the two, we'll see that it does 15.5 DPS with 15.2 DPS with reload. So with all things considered, with reload, the heavy missile launcher is actually going to do a little bit more damage than the rapid lights. But again, that rapid light is going to apply that damage so much better. Now, when it comes to the larger weapon systems, we kind of see the same things again, with cruise missiles being your long-range weapon system and torpedoes being your short-range weapon system, and rapid heavy missile launchers being your punch-down weapon system. The cruise missile system, again, you've got Fury and Precision. They follow the same rules. So Fury is going to be very short, very bad application, very high potential. And let's look at exactly what that means. When we look at Fury missiles, when we're looking at explosion radius, look at that explosion radius, 567 meters. Like this battleship has a signature radius of 465 meters. This Fury cruise missile is not even going to be doing all of its damage to a battleship. You already need a target painter, at least one target painter on a battleship for your cruise missiles to be doing the maximum amount of their damage. This is why, more than anything, like missile systems will almost always use target painters, because target painters are just more damage, and pretty significantly too. So that's something to keep in mind. The cruise missile flight time, if we go with just a normal weapon or normal shot, this thing's going to go 66 kilometers. And that may not seem like a lot, but remember, this is completely unbonused. So a good example is like, oh, I can't really show it off right now because I don't have skills on this character, but like Ravens are silly. You know, you can actually get missiles to shoot out to the same extreme ranges as railguns. So missiles are just as snipey as some of the snipiest long-range turrets. The difference, though, is that, remember, this missile launcher is going to take flight time of 14 seconds. So it's going to take 14 seconds, possibly longer. I mean, like, because if you have skills and if you have, other stuff that extends its flight time, like when we talk about extending its range, you're either going to make them go faster or you're going to extend the flight time. And there are skills to do both, but that means that it's going to take 14 seconds, which is an eternity, to get to the enemy target. So if you're like trying to snipe somebody who's trying to warp off, obviously a missile system isn't going to be great for that, because you're going to have to wait for that missile to go all the way to the enemy. Whereas like a railgun, you hit up one, they blow up. You're done. But if you don't care about the time, because you've got two big fleets coming after each other, the railgun's going to give up a bunch of its damage in order to be able to fire that far. Whereas all of those Ravens, they're going to shoot those missiles. And sure, it's going to take you 15, 20 seconds for those missiles to hit target. But when they do, it's over. Now, the fun thing about this is that it means that when you're playing with these missile systems, with turrets, you're kind of trying to figure out the transversal, and you're trying to match their vector with your vector to kind of minimize the transversal velocity and all that sort of stuff. With missiles, you play a totally different game, which is that you guess how many missiles will it take to kill your enemy, and then you count your missiles. Often in like a mission, I know that it'll take 2 to 3 missiles to kill an enemy. So I'll shoot the missile, and then I'll count the cycles, 1, 2, 3, and then I'll down cycle the missiles. And I'll start shooting at another target, knowing that first target is already dead. He's already dead. He just doesn't know it yet. And if I keep shooting missiles at that other target, I'm going to actually waste missiles. I'm going to waste ammunition by having missiles in flight towards a target that is already dead. So I'll like put my target painters on a target, shoot 3 missiles, and then pick a new target and start shooting missiles on that. And then as soon as that first target dies, I turn off the target painter and I get the target painter on the second target before the next wave of missiles hit, preferably, and then keep going. So it's a little bit of a different gameplay. It's kind of fun. I like it. But, you know, so that's kind of how fighting with missiles are like. You have to count your missile shots, especially at these with like cruise missiles. Torps are a little different. We have only 13-kilometer maximum flight range. So again, very, very short with torps. Very, very, very short compared to a lot of other weapon systems on a battleship level. But they also do a ton of damage. But here's the thing. You thought the explosion radius was bad on cruise. 697. How much was it for the cruise? The worst, we were talking about how bad the explosion radius for the cruise missile was. It's 567. The torpedo rage, the equivalent for torpedoes is 697, which basically means unless you're shooting at a capital, you are not doing your maximum damage with rage torpedoes, which means bring all the target painters. All the target painters, please. That's a critical piece to this. Now, the normal explosion radius is 405, which is still going to be a lot more than the 330 of the cruise missiles. So torps are going to be very short range, extremely large signature radius. So it's going to be all about how much you can bloom their signature radius, period. I started EVE because of Wingspan and their bomber videos, trained them to torp bombers, and found out how quick and fast an Astero can munch a torp bomber. Yeah, that's the problem, right? Is that like, so one of the fun things is that there actually is a frigate that can shoot torpedoes. It's the only frigate that can use large weapon systems in the game on a practical level. So if we go to our ship tree, we can find stealth bombers. Now, stealth bombers can use bombs, which is another topic for another day, but they also can fit torpedoes. And they give a bonus to flight time and velocity. And you can see that it has a big reduction in the power grid requirements of torpedoes, which is what allows it to be able to fit them. So stealth bombers are really, really cool at like assassinating things. And if you need to get damage on a very small platform, very agile platform, it's cloaky, it's a frigate. If you need to go after a structure and you're worried about being disrupted, you can't really fight the defense, but you just want to put damage on the target. Stealth bombers are great for that because they're bringing a battleship weapon on a frigate. But I don't see any application bonuses here. Basically, if you try to use a stealth bomber on a frigate, you're going to see how little damage. I said you'll always do some amount of damage, but boy, is that word some doing a lot of... Sometimes that sum is 1. That is kind of the way these things work. And then, of course, there's the rapid heavies, which follow the same sort of rules as rapid lights in the fact that they do about twice as much damage, a little bit more, but have this really long reload time. So even though it does 35 DPS, it only does 28 DPS after reloads. So if you're doing PvE, or if you're in any sort of environment where within a single encounter you have to reload, it's almost always better to be using the normal weapon system for its size category. Either heavy missiles or heavy assault missiles, depending on your range profile. But if you're trying to fight something that's smaller than you, or you're expecting the fight to last less than 30 seconds, by all means, rapids are great. Now, the other useful value here is something like this Praxis, or, well, we'll talk about the details in a second, but there are some ships, like the Praxis, and like the Rattlesnake or whatever, that have not only missile bonuses, but also drones. Drones are the other secondary weapon system, and we'll have a whole episode on drones. But the key here is that ships that have good drone systems tend to be good for having rapids, because your rapid ends up being your bursty damage and good for punching going down, and then your drones help cover that gap where you can't damage things because you're in reload. So the Praxis in particular, because it has not only this missile bonus, but also the drone bonus, rapid heavies end up being very good for the Praxis. There's one other reason why rapid heavies are really good on the Praxis specifically. And right now, every single one of you new pilots, anybody who's less than a month in the game, anybody who's still alpha, pay attention, perk up, look at me, because this is the critical thing. This is, if you take nothing out of this, this is what it is for you. Alphas can only train, they can train Tech 2 small weapons, they can train Tech 2 medium weapons, they can only train Tech 1 large weapons. For instance, if I want to train this Tech 2 missile system, you can see this is Omega only. This Torpedo Launcher 2 is Omega only. This Rapid Heavy Missile Launcher, a battleship weapon, is alpha friendly. Why is that? Well, as it turns out, the missile launchers themselves don't actually take, like the missile launchers are based off of the missile that it shoots, not the size category of the weapon. So, rapid light missile launchers take light missile skills, which is again a frigate-sized weapon skill, and rapid heavy missile launchers take heavy missile skills, which is a medium weapon system. And alphas can train Tech 2 medium weapon systems, which means rapid heavy missile launchers are the only battleship weapon that an alpha can train the Tech 2 variant of. On top of that, remember, the Praxis has 0 skill requirements. The only skill requirement for the Praxis is Spaceship Command 1, which means if you're an alpha, if you're brand new to the game, you can get, in fact, you can roll a brand new alpha right this second using my buddy code down below, get that free million skill points, and you can make a Praxis that is incredibly strong and is basically as strong as any experienced player. Like, it's a full-fledged battleship weapon system. You don't have to train any battleship skills, which means you don't need to train any of the prerequisite skills. Check this out. So if I wanted to train a Raven right now, because I don't have any skills on this character, if I wanted to fly this Raven, it would take me 4 days and 13 hours worth of training to be able to, of Omega training, so twice that as an alpha, in order to fly this Raven. So if I got a million free SP, I'd have to spend 159,000 of that million skill points just to fly the battleship. Whereas if I had a Praxis, I don't have to train any skill points at all. I'm already in the battleship. So that means I can use all of my precious million skill points on other things. Like, for instance, that rapid heavy missile launcher. So now I can have a Praxis, I can have a rapid heavy Praxis for less than 1 million skill points. Tech 2. Now, granted, you probably don't want to spend all 800,000 of your million skill points on being able to use Tech 2 missile rapid heavy. So you may just go with an Arbalist. And then you've only spent 24,000 skill points. Think about all those skill points for tank, for your mods, for your E-War, everything. And this Praxis has so many slots. If you need to sacrifice a few low slots for fitting because you're an alpha and you don't have good fitting skills, guess what? Praxis has fitting space for days. You can put, most of your low slots as being fitting mods if you needed to. So the Praxis is the best alpha ship in the game, in my opinion. And so the same thing is true when it comes to light missile systems. If you've trained frigate weapons, you've trained all your stuff, you've gotten yourself your hook bill, and you want to move up to the Caracal, well, congratulations. If you're trained in the hook bill, you're also trained in the Caracal's weapon system if you're working with rapid lights. That is another big advantage of missiles. Now, I think that's most of the big stuff when it comes to rapid launchers are such a skewed module, battleship-sized medium guns when? Well, that's the whole point, is that like this is the niche that missiles have over turrets. There's a lot of advantages that turrets have, but one of the quirks of missiles is that you can use the smaller size category missile system in the larger thing. And again, yeah, you're going to have to deal with the reload time of the rapid heavy missile launcher, but you still have your drones as half of your damage for your Praxis. I've done structure defenses with alpha friendly Praxises before. Back when we did invasions, we had entire jobs, like we had alpha praxises that we call day one praxis. You want to come and do invasions with us? Here, roll a new character. Don't even, like, if your character's in nullsec, I don't care. Just roll a new character, use this skill plan, grab this praxis, and you can come into our fleet, and your job is to, like, shoot at the turrets that drop, like, the structures that they drop in the World Arc fights. Yeah, Feroxes are good. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's reasons to use other things, but I'm just saying, like, you absolutely can. And the praxis is a very, very strong ship in a lot of different ways. So just a little bit of a special point nestled in this missile guide. But before we wrap things up, there is one more thing that I want to talk about when it comes to missile launchers, which is that they have auto-targeting missiles, which used to be called friend or fire missiles, well, actually, I guess there's two more things. So the auto-targeting missile launchers, effectively, what they do is, normally with a weapon system, you have to lock a thing, you have to select your active target, you have to hit F1 or whatever, and it fires at that target. With auto-targeting missile launchers, what you do is you activate the module, and it shoots that missile at the closest valid target to your ship. These missiles are not great most of the time. We can go Scourge Cruise, and then auto-target. Oh yeah, never mind. I've still got quite a bit to talk about. I just realized. Inferno Cruise and Inferno auto-targeting cruise. The biggest difference here is, so the cruise missile is going to do 375 damage, and the auto-targeting cruise missile is 281 damage. Precision, we already talked about precision. It allows you to kind of hit smaller signature radiuses. The auto-targeting is going to do less damage, but the cool thing about auto-targeting is that you don't actually have to lock your target in order to use them, which means that they're useful for when you're lazy. One of the most common uses for auto-targeting missiles I've seen is like people that are running dens or other DED sites in HiSec. They will use auto-targeting missiles because then they don't have to bother locking any of the rats. They just kind of slow boat their way through the room with auto-targeting missiles going out wherever and just killing everything as they come. They also get used anywhere where you're worried about being jammed. Even if you're jammed, you can still use auto-targeting missiles and they'll go after stuff. Now, granted, you don't get to choose who they go after, but it's better than not shooting at all. And in fact, the newest freighter that was added to the game, the Avalanche, even has a bonus for auto-targeting missile damage. 20% bonus to auto-targeting missiles per Upwell freighter level. So it's 100% additional damage to auto-targeting missiles plus a missile damage bonus. So that's going to make auto-targeting missiles do as much damage, if not more, than normal missiles on this on this platform. The biggest problem is that I said that you don't get to choose, and it goes after the closest target, from my understanding. So that means if your opponent knows what they're doing, they can kind of duck in and out of range to kind of spread out your damage to make it so that you're not really that effective. So you're sort of at their mercy, but it's significantly better than any of the other options. What have I missed? What is the most important thing about missiles that I missed? You can use auto-targeting missiles on golems and focus on tractoring wrecks. Yep. The missile knows where it is at all times. It's because it knows where it isn't. Yeah. Okay. Yep. The missile knows where it is because it knows where it isn't. Yes. How exactly would they know that you're using autos? Because you're in an avalanche. The problem here is that the avalanche, being a freighter, takes a long time to lock your target. So if you start shooting right away, that means you're using auto-targeting missiles because you haven't actually targeted anything. Also, if they're hitting you, if you're hitting them and you haven't targeted them yet, that means that you're using auto-targeting missiles, right? It isn't too hard to figure out that you're using auto-targeting missiles if they care. Auto-targeting missiles are still very niche when it comes to PvP, but they are definitely something that people lean back on in PvE, especially if they're willing to sacrifice the additional damage for the convenience of not having to worry about locking targets and doing things. Kind of like using drones that automatically attack based on defending your ship. Lore-wise, would these auto-targeting missiles launched from an avalanche be heat-seeking missiles? I don't think so. They still base on valid targets, because like if there can be ships that are not valid targets within range that the auto-targeting missiles don't hit. Now, actually, lore-wise, it's actually true. So in the lore, short-range missile systems are also known as unguided missile systems. The reason why long-range missile systems can shoot long-range is because they're guided missile systems, whereas shorter-range missiles are unguided missiles. So like rockets and stuff. So like we'll see here, if we go to, the cruise missiles have auto-targeting, but if we go to torps do not have auto-targeting missiles. Auto-targeting missiles are only for the long-range or guided missile systems. Now, it used to be that there were some skills that only worked with guided, or they mentioned guided versus unguided. It was kind of confusing, but last I checked, they got rid of all of those. So let's go ahead and check. So when it comes to missiles, we have auto-targeting missile skills, which help with auto-targeting missiles. Then we've got the different types of missile systems, so light, blah, blah, blah. For as far as support skills, we have missile bombardment, which increases flight time by up to 50%. Remember how I told you that there are skills that make it so that you can have more than a second worth of flight, or like an in-between seconds of flight time? This is it. Missile launcher operation increases your rate of fire. That's just speed, or haste. That's just damage. Missile projection, 50% bonus to... Yeah, see, this is the confusing one, because I think that they changed this in the past, and that's why this is the way it is. But it says skill at boosting missile bay trigger circuits and enhancing guided missile ignition systems. So this used to only affect long-range missiles, I believe. But now it affects all missiles. Missile velocity, so this makes it go further. Rapid launch, again, it's just faster rate of fire, so more damage. Navigation prediction increases the factor of target's velocity for all missiles. So this effectively helps your explosion velocity versus their velocity. Warhead upgrades is just additional 10% damage. Over here we've got guided missile precision, which again is kind of confusing because it's all missiles. But this is the effective signature radius, so it allows you to apply better based on their signature radius versus your explosion radius. And I think that's it, right? When it comes to support skills. There is one other special type of missile, which is defender missiles. Defender missiles used to be that a defender missile was... like they shot down other missiles. Remember how I told you that like a missile is a thing in space that could take damage from things like smart bombs theoretically? Well, it used to be that defender missiles were missiles that shot at other missiles. But in, I think, the Citadel expansion, they actually changed them. So now defender launchers, first of all, they can only be fit on destroyers. So let's go ahead and grab that Synesis and throw this defender launcher on it. Now, command destroyers actually have a bonus to make it so you can use them more often. They have an incredibly long, so they have a rate of fire, a reload time of 10 seconds and a reactivation delay of 2 minutes. So you can only shoot it once every 2 minutes, barring skills, and it's banned in Empire space. Why is this? Well, another time we're going to talk about bombs, but defender missiles are designed to counter bombs. When a defender missile launcher is shot, it will pick a random bomb that's currently in flight, and the missile will go to that bomb and shoot it. So if there are multiple bombs in flight and you shoot multiple defender missiles, because you can only have one defender missile launcher per ship. So let's say you've got 5 destroyers, each of them have a defender launcher, and there's 5 bombs coming at you. Those 5 destroyers shoot their defender missiles. That doesn't mean that all 5 bombs are dead. Each of those launchers are going to independently choose randomly one of those 5 bombs. So it could kill all 5 of them, but they all could just shoot at one and take down that one and still have 4 left. It's a bit of it's designed to be a protection and a counter for bombs, but there's a balancing act between when to use them, when not to use them, and how to get the most use out of them. So they're extremely niche and not even really considered to be the same as other missiles, even though they use missile mechanic. Okay, so what kind of people use missile launchers? Well, as we talked about, missile launchers are designed for people that want to go really, really fast and also want to punch down, and then also want to make sure that their own velocity and transversal are not a factor in the actual fighting, right? Turrets, you might outtrack yourself. So what we end up seeing is Caldari ships have a good missile line where we have the Kestrel, which is a very relatively speedy little buzzardy dude that shoots light missiles and rockets, as well as the Condor, which is also very, very fast and uses missiles. And technically speaking, because it uses launcher hardpoints, so the Griffin and the Griffin Navy issue uses missiles. The Hawk uses missiles. And yeah, the Crow uses missiles, which is the Interceptor. And of course, the Caldari Navy Hook build, known for its double web rocket build and its light missile build. Also a really good missile build, fit. So lots of missile options there. As we go up, we've got the Corax, Missile Destroyer that steps up into the Stork, Missile Command Destroyer, and the Jackdaw is missile focused. For the cruisers, you've got that Caracal, which I talked about is very famous for the Rapid Light Caracal, very strong. Actually had to get nerfed because of how strong they were. I think the Blackbird technically uses missiles, but then of course the Caracal Navy issue and the Osprey Navy issue. So both Navy issue cruisers for the Caldari use missiles. The Cerberus uses missiles. The Onyx uses missiles. Up here into command ships, the Drake is easily the most iconic missile platform in the entire game. Really, really good tank. If you're new into the game and you're getting into missions, when I started playing, this was the ship to train into as an early mission runner. This thing has incredibly good resistances. It has really good application with its missiles, and you can pick your damage type with those missiles. This thing will run level 3s all day like a champion. Likewise, you can always step up to the Drake Navy issue, which is also going to be your missile boat. These ships, by the way, those two ships are the reason why my alt is a missile boat. When I wanted to go make a mission guy, I made a Caldari because of the Drake. And likewise, there's the Nighthawk, which is not necessarily known for its damage, but is the tankiest shield command ship. For the battleship platform, we talked about the Raven. The Raven has this really good range, rate of fire, and maximum velocity bonus, so it's going to be able to shoot super far. And then the Raven Navy issue takes that idea of shooting far and has really good application. With, of course, the Golem. Everything we've talked about today is the reason why the Golem is, in many situations, the Golem becomes the best possible ship mathematically for subcapital content. For instance, when Emerging Conduits came out, the thing about Emerging Conduits was that once you finished one, the next one would spawn in a minute. So we were able to compare all these different fits based on how fast they could get payout to payout, right? You could go take your ship, you could run Emerging Conduits for like an hour or two, and then you can go back and look at your records and see how fast you were running those sites by seeing where your payouts were. So we had like 12-minute fits, we had 10-minute fits, we had 8-minute fits. The Golem was mathematically the best. You could prove it. The best ship in the game. Because remember, there's no random number generation when it comes to missiles. So if you can guarantee that application, you're done. And I seriously don't understand why CCP did this. This is like, the Golem is so strong. You can see here this Paladin, right? It has armor, repair, energy turret, damage, activation cost, optimal range, and that's all good. Damage, range, cool. But this guy comes with a target painter effectiveness bonus. So remember how I talked about like how cruise missiles and torpedoes are really hard to be able to do their maximum damage because you need to have target painters on the opponent in order to make them big enough to be able to do your maximum damage? Well, guess what? This thing not only has a bonus to its explosion velocity, a 25% bonus to its explosion velocity, which means that you're going to be able to catch things that are going faster, so you don't need to web them as much. But also, your target painter gets a 50% effectiveness bonus. So the double target painter Golem just dunks shit. Even small stuff, this thing can apply so well. It is so good. This is one of the reasons why the Golem is considered, in a lot of situations, the top Marauder. In addition to that, you also have the Widow, which does missiles, and the Scorpion that does missiles, but those are mostly jam platforms. And also, they have the missile Marauder. Now, the big thing about Caldari, though, the Caldari actually lose out a little bit. Oh yeah, and Scorp Navy issue is actually really good for missiles as well. But there is a caveat when it comes to missiles with Caldari, which is that there are different bonuses, right? There are different ways of increasing the damage that a thing does. You can either increase the damage per hit, or you can increase the rate of fire of the shots. So if we go to if we look at the Caracal here, it has a 25% rate of fire bonus. So if you have your cruiser skill to 5, you just do 25% more damage with the Caracal. Easy peasy. But with the Osprey Navy issue, and pretty much any time that a Caldari ship has a bonus to missile damage, you actually run into an interesting issue, which is that if you read this carefully, it says 25% bonus per skill level, so a total of 125% bonus, to kinetic light missiles, heavy missiles, and heavy assault missile damage. Not all kinds of missiles. So Caldari ships that have a missile damage bonus are what we call kinetic locked, right? In the same way that lasers are thermal EM locked, because you have to use like all of the damage has to be EM and thermal. In the same way, a lot of these Caldari ships that we just went over are going to have this kinetic damage bonus, which you do not get if you are doing non-kinetic weapons. Now, this one in particular actually has a smaller bonus to EM, explosive, and thermal, but not all of them get that. For instance, like this Condor here, a Condor is 100% kinetic locked. It gets a 50% bonus to kinetic damage and no bonus to any other damage type. Drake Navy is... Oh, yeah. Drake Navy is not kinetic locked at all. That's cool. So there are exceptions here, but it's one of those things that you want to read very, very close to make sure you understand and realize that, like, so each race has their own damage type. The damage type for the Caldari is kinetic, and that is reflected in the fact that a lot of the missile systems that they use are kinetic locked. A lot. Okay, fine. The Jackdaw, yeah, but the Jackdaw is because it's a miscellaneous bonus. It's a roll bonus. It's not a skill bonus. That's a little different too. But my point is that there's a lot of Caldari ships that are kinetic locked. And so the important thing to do is, like, read it carefully, you know, to see whether or not, like this one here, the Cerberus, you know, we showed off like the Dark Cerberus. Well, the Cerberus, why isn't the Cerberus good in other weathers? Well, because the Cerberus is kinetic locked. It does 25% more damage with kinetic missiles than any other kind of missiles. Therefore, you know, you can shoot other types of missiles, but you're giving up 25% of their damage bonus by doing so. The other race, however, that is good at missiles is known for flexibility, and that is the Minmatar. The Minmatar Republic also has a lot of missile ships. You have the Breacher, but the Vigil Fleet issue, which, by the way, the Vigil Fleet issue, missiles plus target painter bonuses, so good. You know, you have even the Probe the Probe Fleet issue uses missiles. One of the two here, the Jaguar uses missiles. The Talwar is a missile boat. The Svipul, not a missile boat. So the only Tech 3 destroyer that does missiles is the Caldari. Wait, what? Oh, huh. I always thought it was target painter. I guess it is webs. My bad. It's a web bonus. That's also pretty good. Yeah, you think that the Hookbill's good. The Vigil Fleet issue is really good in the same role as the Hookbill. I digress. Bellicose is missiles, and that is Bellicose. The Bellicose and the Caracal kind of match up against each other. The Caracal takes the cake a lot of the time, but the Bellicose comes with that target painter bonus. And the nice thing about target painters is that, like, it's the gift for your whole fleet. So if you have a fleet of Caracals and a Bellicose, that Bellicose is going to be helping all of your ships apply better damage, which is really cool. There's less missile boats over here in the Minmatar side, but, you know, we still have the Cyclone and the Cyclone Fleet issue and the Claymore. A lot of the battleships are actually really confusing because they can basically use both missiles and turrets effectively as good. So they can be either way. Another race, actually, a little odd one. Turns out, so a little bit of a lore thing here. The Khanid Kingdom, as part of the Amar, seceded from the rest of the Amar 200 years ago, you know, during their own little uprising, because King Khanid didn't want to perform the Radishathal sin after losing his attempt at becoming the emperor. So they left the empire, but they are still part of the empire. In fact, they've been let back in. But because of the fact that they are outside of the empire, they had to get friends from other places. It turns out that the Khanid ended up becoming friends with Lidai, which Lidai is the Caldari mega corporation that works the most on the missile weapons. So because of that, you can see that the ships that are associated with Khanid often have at least missile hardpoints, if not bonuses, right? And you can tell Khanid because they're black, right? So like this ship here, right? This is a Khanid ship. Likewise, if we go to the Arbitrator, we'll see that while it doesn't have bonuses for missiles, it does have hard points for missiles. So this can be a missile boat. Likewise, a lot of these, like the Prophecy has missile hard points because the Damnation is a Khanid ship. So there is actually missile boats sprinkled in to the Amar. They're not as good as the Minmatar and Caldari at being missile boats, but they still exist. At least as an option. The Dragoon has as many missile hardpoints as there are turret hardpoints. So once upon a time there was a Galente missile boat, but they changed it. Well, there still is a Galente missile boat, the Nemesis. Aha! The other thing is that because they're so good at being kitey, this is why the Mordu's Legion likes missile ships. Mortis Legion are designed to be very, very, very fast shield ships that keep range and zip around. And so they also use missiles in their complement. And then finally, of course, the king of the PvE, we have the Guristas line, which are that other ship line that I was talking about that uses missiles and drones. Most of the effectiveness of the Guristas line comes from the drones. They do have missiles, and because of the fact that they are a combination of Caldari and Gallente, they're not kinetic locked, but they are kinetic/thermal locked. So they can use kinetic and thermal missiles. This is why often when it comes to Guristas weapons or Guristas ships, I tend to use rapids on them because you've got your drones as your primary damage system, and then you've got your rapid for specific targets or punching down or bursting through something really quick. So this is why, like, the Gila, very, very popular in the Abyss, it uses rapid lights a lot of the time to like burst down small things, and uses drones for the majority of its work. The Rattlesnake is one of the biggest workhorses in the game, one of the best passive shield tanks in the game. The Guristas use a combination of the incredibly powerful shield resistances of the Caldari, as well as the very strong Gallente, which oddly enough, Gallente give missile bonuses with the Guristas, so figure that out. But yeah, so the Guristas are probably the king of PvE, I would say. In fact, I would argue that almost every single, I say every and then hover over the Mamba, pretty much every single Guristas ship is pretty close to best in slot in more than one situation across the board. It is, I was talking about this over the weekend. I consider the Guristas ship line probably the single most overpowered ship line in the game. They've got really strong offense, really strong defense, and a big piece of that is their use of missiles. I think that's it though, right? Yep. So, but do any of them have bonuses for what? Which one, the Amarr or the Guristas? The Amarr? Yeah, because the Sacrilege have missile bonuses. The Damnation also has missile bonuses. The thing is that a lot of the ships that end up having those missile bonuses are kind of known for other things. The Python takes the cake with style. That is true, but that's also, I mean, that's a Concord ship. Any uses for PvP? For what? For the Guristas? The Worm, I would argue that the Worm is like the reason why Navy complexes in faction warfare existed, because the Worm is so oppressive in its weight class normally. The Gila also extremely strong in PvP. Rattlesnakes can actually get used in PvP quite a bit too. Maybe not quite as much as Macarials, but they definitely do. And oh yeah, that's a good point. The Amarr, the Lancer Dread, uses missiles as much. I mean, is it really? Possession is 9/10 of the law? Well, I mean, oh no, yeah, because it's just a special edition ship. So it's not any of these kind. It's not on here. I mean, I'll leave it to the comment section to decide whether or not the Python is a Guristas ship or a Concord ship. Let me know what you think. But I think that's about it. Last check. Please help me out. Is there anything I've missed when it comes to missiles at all? Let me look through here. We talked about the skills. There are implants that will also improve missiles. We talked about auto-targeting. We talked about defenders. XL Dreadnought missiles are the only type of rapids that use the short-range weapon system instead of the long-range weapon system. So, like, the rapids for Dreadnoughts would be rapid torps types of missiles, T2 missiles, Festival launchers, but that doesn't even take a launcher hardpoint, I don't think, does it? Oh, right, modules. So you've got the ballistic control system for low slots, missile guidance enhancer for low slot for helping with application, missile guidance computer for mid slots for application. You've got various different rigs. When it comes to rigs, the drawback on the rigs when it comes to missiles are that it increases the CPU cost. Once again, just like we talked with turrets, if for some reason you're given a ship and it's a missile ship and you're blown out in CPU and you don't know why, double check your rigging skills because that may fix your problem for you. I think that's it. Missile towers. I mean, this is less about how to use missiles, but I will say that, like, missile towers get used in sites and PvE a lot as a way of doing a different kind of damage than the rest of the rats. So that's why, like, often missile towers in missions and other places like that, they will not be part of the waves. They won't affect your spawns, but usually they'll do a different kind of damage than the rest of the room, so they're useful to take down anyways. But I think that about wraps it up. Let me know in the comments down below if I missed anything, but this has been your missile guide for EVE 2025. Next time, we will be covering, I think we're going to cover tank and then we will go into the specialty weapon systems, so like drones, breacher pods, etc. But let me know down below which one you would prefer me go for next. We also have been putting out a lore guide over time because I know that there were people that were very excited about having more lore information put out there. But please, if you've made it this far and you like what I do, like, comment, subscribe, let me know how I'm doing, and consider becoming a supporter, either a member or a patron, or tipping me on my PayPal tip jar, or sending a super like or super chat in the videos. All of that, very, very, very useful. Yeah, we will be talking, Logi is part of Tank, so we'll be covering Logi when we cover tanking, but I do want to give my big thanks to all of my Immortal tier sponsors, including 745 MPSI, Arydanika the Queen, Bad Boy Smooth, Ebo Leet, Erladis, Elange, Flash Gordon, May, Malak Starfire, Malin, Mercuton, Nephilim, LM1, Sheesh, and Rid. And I do also want to call out Ragtag Pro. Thank you so much. I put out a call because of my bills, and several of you guys have really stepped up. Ragtag was one of them. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate all of you and everyone who's made it this far. Everybody who's made it this far, thank you so much. Everybody who leaves a like, thank you so much. Share it with a friend, because we are here to help maximize player engagement with EVE Online and increase player literacy of EVE Online, because a better player base makes a better EVE Online. So with all that said, I have been Ashrothi. I've been playing this game since 2010, talking about it since 2012, and I'm here to put EVE into context for you, my fellow Empyreans. Thank you all for coming, and until next time, I'll see you in space.